Hey, everybody, and welcome to the first of a three-part series of Vassals of Kingsgrave podcast discussing the book Dune, which we are reading in advance of the release of Denis Villeneuve's new film adaptation this October. My name's Bina 007. I'll be your host today, and I am the Dune Virgin, and I'm joined by Lawmaster Zach.
Hi, this is Zach. Not much of a lore master. I'll do my best, but I'm here.
And Hannah.
Hello. It's whatever on the there's no forums, so
Winged shadow on the Discords. And we're also joined by Kit Kat History. So hey Kat.
Hi.
And apparently you have podcasted on Vassals of Kingsgrave before, but we're not asked the newbie questions. So I'm going to ask them now. So do you want to tell the listeners how you found Vassals of Kingsgrave?
YouTube. I was looking for actually it was a while ago, so just YouTube.
And were you into Song of Ice and Fire in particular, or
Yes. Actually, my boyfriend watched the show, and then I remember, I was at the Barnes and Noble up by my house, and I came across the first book, and I'm like, I might as well read this, and I love it. I have read all the books.
And who's your favorite character? I think that's usually our final newbie question.
Yeah. Jon Snow, actually.
Ah, there you go. A classic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, welcome. And, welcome also to Patrick the Tall, who's joined us.
Hey, y'all.
Hey.
Okay, so as I said, listener, this is going to be a discussion of book one. This is going back to our Song of Ice and Fire book first roots in honor of Mimi, the podcast queen. So we are going to discuss it kind of spoiler free, or we're going to discuss just up to the end of book one, because that's all I've read. And as we obviously get further through the books, we'll discuss more. So I don't know how to do a chapter summary, but maybe an overall book summary is, as far as I can tell, and you guys can tell me if I've said stuff wrong, we enter a futuristic world that seems to have grown out of our own world at some point previously, because there are things like Bible verses and sort of earthly religions, but it's obviously a multi-planet world, and it seems to be run Star Wars style. And actually, being a huge Star Wars fan, you can see so much inspiration from this to Star Wars by a weird trade federation or guild who controls the shipping of many things, including spice, which is as yet kind of ambiguous as to what it does, but feels very addictive, and then it gives people certain powers. There is also an emperor who I haven't met yet in the book, and various important aristocratic houses. So one is House Atreides, who I guess are the good guys. And so far we have seen the Duke being assassinated, Ned style, and his young son, Paul, who people think might be the chosen one, Jon Snow style. And he has a mum who is called Jessica, who is a member of a very weird kind of nun order called the Bene Gesserit or Gesserit. And they seem to have an obsession with bloodlines, which makes me feel very nervous and Nazi style. And their arch enemies appear to be the Harkonnen family, I guess, and Baron Harkonnen. Anyway, so that sets up the book. And apparently what's happened so far, from what I can tell, is that the Harkonnen family have done a deal whereby the Atreides swap their planet for the Dune planet, which the Harkonnens run, which should be, technically speaking, lucrative, because that's where all the spice is milled, but has a set of people living there called Freemen, who are like the sand crawlers, sand people in Star Wars, and yet the heroes, not the dodginess that's in Star Wars. And you also have sandworms, which we haven't seen. Well, we have seen them attack so far, but it's a very perilous planet. And we know that the whole deal is dodgy and that it's a trap. It's a trap. Because the Duke's already dead and Paul has had to flee with his mum, which is a little bit Bran Stark, I guess. And he has, in the course of escaping, I don't know if it's because there's just spice around, but he has adopted or discovered a set of really insane powers of prophesying and all sorts of other things, in which he's also intuited and revealed to his mum that his he's actually a mix of Atreides and Harkonnen, so that her parentage is revealed to be Harkonnen, and that his dad was Atreides, so he is a Song of Ice and Fire. So that's a lot of plot. I mean, that, George R. R. Martin would be aghast, right, to have that big parentage reveal at the end of book one. Does that sound garbled to you guys who know this book? Because it felt garbled when I was trying to put it together, because a lot feels like it's happened.
No, it's very good. You did, that was a nice job.
Okay, well, thank you. So I don't know how we want to discuss this going forward. I mean, maybe you guys want to talk about your experience with Dune and whether you're big fans and how you rate it. I mean, so far, I would say, as someone who's not read the book before, I really am into it. Like, I was really speeding through, and if it weren't pausing for this podcast, I would have carried on. So I am enjoying it, but I do find it so far quite simplistic as to there are clearly some very good guys and some very bad guys. Maybe that changes and becomes more complicated. And I also, in the wake of A Song of Ice and Fire, find it quite humorless. And I find all the mysticism and the religious stuff a little bit hard to take, but I am into it insofar as I go. I'm not sure if it's really my cup of tea, but we'll see as we get further. But I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Patrick. What's your relationship with Dune?
Oh, Dune. It's a book I read after I watched the movie, so I have the pageantry of the David Lynch movie in my head every time I see this, read this book. But it is the first half of like the first volume of the Dune saga. I'm guessing that's what I didn't really get to that. Is it they've just escaped, and that's when we're stopping right now, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, book one.
Cool. Yeah, but we don't do book one and book two in Denmark. We just take 3 tomes, just like
I see.
three giant tomes, just like the Lord of the Rings. So
Gotcha.
so yeah, I know where we are, and I think it gets crazier from here. Let's say it like that. There is gonna be more humor, more intrigue, more things that will come. So it is the part of the series, the saga, that is just introducing characters and trying to make some sort of ambiance for the reader, so that they feel like this is highly space gothic-esque sort of
Okay,
setting.
and that has worked. I also then, after I read this book one, watched the Lynch movie, which I'd never seen before, up to this point. So I haven't. I stopped myself at this point, and that was
God.
bad. I mean, that's that. I think we should do a podcast on that at the end of this all by itself, because that. But there are things to be said. Is it one of your favorite fantasy series, Patrick, or are you more sort of like, yeah?
No, definitely. I was never, to begin with, I wasn't ever actually into like true fantasy or high fantasy. I was more like sci-fi or like current times things. So this was right up my alley in the sense that it's sort of still felt weird and crazy, and then but was also it's a weird sort of book that has a lot of like meaningful messages for us as current day society. So that's also
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of the ecology stuff is bang on the nose for this current moment of climate change awareness, right? I mean, it struck me as being incredibly relevant.
Frank Herbert and Isaac Asimov for both of the two like giant sci-fi people who both had like almost prophetic ideas of how things would come to be. Also, but I think Frank Herbert is the most palatable one of the two. If you have to ask my opinion on that. But in any case, I adore the way he puts it up and makes it so that you start thinking more about both like the world and how it came to be. There's the whole, we've already have been told about the ecology of Dune, and there's a lot of good themes there, at least.
Okay. Welcome, Jock. Lovely to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Good. Zach, how did you come to be a Dune aficionado?
Well, I'll just say again, I'm really not one, to be frank.
Oh, okay.
I'm really not, because I think the reason I got into Dune initially was just because I was reading, of course, A Song of Ice and Fire and a lot of these other works of science fiction and fantasy, and Dune always gets brought up a lot as one that you should try, which I did. And the first time I read it, I wasn't actually a huge fan of it. I was definitely one of those people that, had a hard time sinking into the world because of all the just the proper nouns, the details, the information about it. It can be very overwhelming when you first read it. There's certainly things that I enjoyed about it. Absolutely. I think the world itself, I really appreciated just how rich it was and just how much I don't know. It's something about the feudal science fiction setting is very different from anything I've seen before, and I really enjoyed that. And it's actually funny because it's kind of what I thought A Song of Ice and Fire was when I first heard about it. For some reason, when I first heard about that story, I thought it was some kind of weird like science fiction setting, and of course, it didn't turn out to be that. But when I read Dune, I was like, wait a minute, this is what I thought that was, and it was cool to experience that. Anyway, I read it again recently, and I think I just appreciated it a lot more, and just kind of it's just a cool document, I think, to see like where it sits in the history of science fiction as a genre and fantasy too. Like it's clearly a very influential book. And there's a lot of things that I've just grown to appreciate about it more and more. But I have only read the first book. I have not read any of the sequels or anything like that. So that's the extent. But I'd probably like to check those out at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, as someone who grew up very much in the Star Wars original trilogy, it was kind of insane to see how much had been, borrowed, influenced, taken from Dune. And I think that maybe that increased my interest in it as a kind of text, like a source text. But I did find it quite, not pompous is too harsh, but I don't know, I was looking for some lightness, which you definitely don't get, certainly so far anyway. How about you, Hannah? Maybe you're the Dune lore master like Patrick on this podcast.
Well, I don't know if anyone can be like a master. It's so dense. And I was just talking to Kat and Abby on the chat the other night, and every time you read it, you'll get new things out of it. And so I'm really enjoying particularly this new reread I'm doing, where I'm at in my life now. And like from the perspective of knowing we're going to do an episode about it, for sure has really brought a lot of new images out in the text that I hadn't had before. So I wouldn't say that anyone can necessarily be an expert. I know Brian Herbert tried to be, and that didn't go well for him. So I'm chagrined to say that necessarily, put that label on it. But yeah, I found this book. So I don't know if I've ever like really shared this on the podcast before, but I have pretty severe, it's a type of dyslexia called dysgraphia. And I was undiagnosed into high school. I started high school and I was miserable, and I had to go to summer school between 8th grade and high school just to get in. My GPA was like 0.17 because I just wouldn't do the work. It was so frustrating for me, but I was smart and no one cared. My parents worked really hard. So I went to my mom at one point and I'm like, I've been faking sick. I can't go back to that place. I'm miserable there. I'm being teased. The teachers don't help me. And she found a family friend who was homeschooling her children to take me on. And that woman really saved my life. She figured out what I had. She figured out what I had, and she took a course on how to teach people like that. So I really didn't know how. I mean, I knew how to read, but I couldn't. I couldn't read on my own anything beyond like a cereal box or a paragraph. And she taught me how to read. And within a year, I was reading Dickens and Vonnegut on my own.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so cool.
And my cousin had a copy of the mini series that Sci-Fi Channel did in the early 2000s, and I'd seen parts of it with her, and I like, what is this? Because it's really grandiose in that movie. And Dune was always one of the films my dad said that he liked the Lynch version. And so I said, well, I'm going to try to tackle this book next then, which did, I bit off a little more than I could chew. It took me a long time. But I didn't get disheartened and I finished it. So I was about 15, 16 when I finished it the first time. And I've reread it probably for like the first 10 years. I reread it every year. And my last read before this one was a couple years ago now. So yeah, but it's one of my favorite books. I think finding it so young, and it has all these religious themes, and it's really shaped a lot of my character and my personal system of beliefs. Like I wouldn't
Wow.
say I'm religious, but I have a lot of influences from the philosophy in this book. I think that's really, it's to me less of a science fiction book and more of a philosophy book.
I can get that. I can see that. But that's
And
profound.
as far as you go, just know that all what you read, all of that is just set up for the beginning of the book.
200 pages in. Never mind.
Yeah, that's just the prologue. So.
How about you, Kat? What's your history with Dune?
Not a lot, actually. I've never seen the movie, the Lynch movie. I've never seen anything. I spend a lot of time on YouTube, so there's a lot of people that I watch. And one of them is Linkara, a comic book reviewer. And he reviewed the comic adaptation of the Lynch movie a couple years ago.
Okay.
And that was my first exposure. Then we decided to do this reread, and I'm like, okay, I'll tackle the book.
Oh, so you're a virgin like me. Okay, cool. But you read the whole thing, right? You sped read the whole thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I did.
Could you say that you were infected with terrible purpose?
Yes. Of course, I'm using my dad's copy, and it's one of those books where I'm like, I'm sure my dad has it because my dad has this massive library. So yeah.
Did you like it? I mean, the fact that you sped read it,
yes,
you were really
did.
sucked into
I did.
it. Yeah.
Yep. I really do enjoy it. A couple of weeks ago, I remember asking my dad if he has any interest in the new one that's coming out in October, in the new movie, and he's like, "No. Ever since the Jodorowsky film was canceled, I have no interest in any adaptation because Alejandro Jodorowsky happens to be one of his favorite directors."
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's one of those. And from what I know of him, he seems to be one of the few people who may be able to actually adapt it to
Film.
well. Yeah.
Well, we should definitely do a podcast about the attempts to film Dune before the new one comes out.
Yeah, definitely.
Because Jodorowsky's Dune is another one of those things, a bit like the book, that's been so, even though it was never made, it's probably the most influential film that was never made, because those H.R. Geiger and Mobius kind of drawings, like the storyboards and all the design work, you can 100% see in films like Blade Runner. I mean, I think there's a documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune that I hope your dad's seen. I'm sure he has, Kat, about how influential the pre-production design work was, and how those of us who like me, who'd never heard of Dune but had seen things like Alien and Blade Runner and Star Wars, have actually been living in a world of Dune completely unknowing. And that's why I think when I read book one, I slipped into it very easily, because actually not knowing it, my whole life has just been warming me up for it and steeping me in the world.
Yep, and Blade Runner is one of my dad's favorite movies. So.
Well, your dad sounds awesome, because
Love Blade Runner.
It's very good.
Very good. How about you, Jock? You've not talked about. You're the last one to go, I think.
Yeah, I've read the original 4 books and Sisterhood, and that's about it. I've also seen the mini-series Other Children of Dune games.
And would you class yourself as a big fan? Like, is this something that you have spent as much time with as Song of Ice and Fire? Like, is it up there as one of the worlds that you love? Yeah.
I'd say it's a series that I do love.
Cool.
They're watching this at the same time.
Well, thank you for joining me. I'm not sure quite how to tackle bit one, but maybe just some of the parts of the world I'd love to talk about a little bit. And I don't know how hard it's going to be for you guys to talk about it without getting into later in the series. But the thing that stood out to me most by the end of it were 3 things, and we can discuss others as well. But for me, I found the concept of the Bene Gesserit or Gesserit really interesting. Like, this idea of this very powerful knowing network of women who were basically deliberately marrying people and manipulating them and creating bloodlines, just simultaneously creepy and weird, but also quite attractive in some ways. The second topic I think was I found Paul very frustrating, because I think we've moved through literature now and we live in a world where we see different types of heroes, and it's not all about, Luke Skywalker style Luke wasn't aristocratic, but these aristocratic heroes who are going to then become even more heroic because they have special powers. And I found him very dry and very hard to sympathize with. So I'd like to talk about like what kind of hero this book is portraying. And then I did, maybe because of my economics background, get sucked into this whole idea of guilds versus aristocratic power, and thinking of like Florentine Italy and the East India Company Zach and I were talking about a bit. I found that really interesting. So I don't know, Bene Gesserit, are they going to be a force for good or bad? I don't know, but I find them very interesting and unusual in fantasy literature, right? Or even sci-fi literature, to see this kind of interplanetary network of women who it feels are adopting the garb of religiosity so they can set up myths about themselves in different planets that might then prove to be helpful. I mean, are they even religious at all? Or is it just a sort of a breeding power grab?
I don't think there's any actual, proof of them having a religion per se. Every time they speak of religion, it's more like we built, as you said, we built this around ourselves so that we could come in at any point and take over if you wanted to. So no proof as of yet of them actually having a true belief, other than maybe robots are bad. I think that's everyone's belief, really, and no nukes against energy shields. That's the two main staples in everyone's religion right now.
So if they really are just putting it all on, that's actually pretty cool. But again, very sinister. I mean, I just found them, I didn't understand whether I was meant to think of them as a bit like the Red Sparrow, and just sort of, I mean, they're quite malign in a way, but I don't know.
I would say it's somewhere between the a Septon kind of network and the Faceless Men.
Oh, okay.
But then with a seat at the table, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and they do seem to be quite respected, right? So all the political leaders are men, aren't they? So it's Duke Leto, and it's Baron Harkonnen. So it's men who lead these houses. Paul, it's very much a masculine world, and yet these women do seem to have quite a powerful seat at the table. But am I mistaking that? Because they still have to marry for power, so maybe I'm overdoing it. Is this a patriarchal world that we're operating in?
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say that necessarily. And then I think not in this book, but in later books, you'll see that there are heads of house that are female.
Oh, okay. Cool.
They're just not relevant to this story, so they're not really talked of. But it's more like, I don't know, have you ever seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding?
Yeah.
Oh, I love this.
So, when the mom says the man is the head of the house, but the woman is the neck, and she turns the head which way she wants it to go. That's sort of the role of the Bene Gesserit in this world, especially when it comes to men.
I think Frank Herbert knew there was going to be My Big Fat Greek Wedding movie at some point. Or
he predicted
that, and then just modeled it upon that book and movie.
It's like a millennium's old prequel, is what it is, actually.
Yeah, it is.
I was just going to say, I think they're actually the thing that I think makes the book work, I would say, the Bene Gesserit. Because if they didn't exist, I just think that the book wouldn't really have any characters or intrigue or fascination that feels like it sets itself apart from something else. But the idea of these, essentially what they are is they're like super monks, right? The Bene Gesserit, they're like Jedi, right? Like they're just like these super powerful people that are so influential in politics and diplomacy that they, in this case, essentially decide what happens, it feels like. And I think the idea that they're women and that they kind of insinuate themselves into all these feudal families and have this sort of eugenics plan, which we can get into, it's so interesting to have that as the baseline, and to see it all through a character like Jessica, who I think you can see that she is kind of inducted into the way this order behaves, but also stands apart from it. She kind of like sees kind of the complications of it. I don't think we have too much of that yet, but I think we see the signs of that even when Paul is being tested in the first chapter. Like we see that like she's not really all about all about these things that they do.
Well,
But
she
at the same time,
rebelled
she has
and
been
had her
thoroughly
boy.
trained in what they do.
Yeah, she rebelled and had a boy. I mean, what I like about the Bene Gesserit is that in a book that so far, don't be insulted, Lawmasters, seems very simplistic as far as there's good, very clearly delineated, there's a good house and a bad house. The Bene Gesserit, so far, I found very hard to pin down. Very slippery.
Yeah.
I don't know to what end they're exercising their power. So that, to me, is what's elevating this above a more sort of Star Wars style, more storybook type tale. So that is interesting
So
to me.
on this reread, it struck me, I forget who said it, if it was Einstein or, the quote, it's like at a certain point, magic and science won't have discernibility. Like, I feel like that intersection is the Bene Gesserit between science and religion.
I think it was Thor that said it.
Yeah, like if you meet sufficiently primitive people, or you're sufficiently far in the future, science is going to feel like magic because it's so outside of your bounds of conception.
Yeah,
Right.
we
It's
have
Arthur
I
C.
feel
Clarke, isn't it?
John.
It's Arthur C. Clarke,
Oh, yeah.
of 2001.
Yeah, Arthur C. Clarke. That's right.
Mm.
Yeah. So I feel like that's Bene Gesserit are that same intersection, but with religion and science.
We already get one example of it, as you just mentioned, Bina. She chose which gender she wanted for her child.
Yeah.
And that's a power that they have. They have the power of molecular control over their own body.
Well, and she knows how long time has passed when she's unconscious during the attack on Arrakeen.
Oh,
you
okay.
know.
So that's not something I'd picked up on.
Yeah, like as she's coming to, she can look back into her how many heartbeats she's had and count that it's been about an hour.
And also we have the I can't remember the exact title. She's like the matriarch, mother superior, or whatever, the one who tests Paul.
Oh yeah.
She says that Leto will lose Arrakis. She knows that in advance, it feels like. So there's a level of prescience, and we also see that with Paul himself, who is like he has descended from the Bene Gesserit lineage. He has his own prophetic dreams, so there's that element too. And I think with the religious piece, I think that's really just a tool. Like I think it's just a thing that they use to advance their ends. For me, like that's how I view that. I don't think that they necessarily believe in anything.
Okay.
I mean, I
Well,
do
that
think
is
they have
very
a
interesting.
creed and they have a philosophy that they follow. I don't.
Yeah, in many ways, that's
Yes,
more
it's like a more
allegorical.
political influence, but there is a doctrine that they have and a kind of mysticism that they have, like whether they believe in it or practice it or not.
But
But I think it's sort
it-
of the philosophy is definitely there, but it's a very logical one. It's not a very
Right.
metaphysical one. It's all about sort of mastering yourself. They have this point when Paul is doing the test, when he puts his hand in the box and he succeeds and he's able to master the pain. Like they distinguish themselves as people who are human, like they are better than animals because they have mastered themselves in this way. And I think that is a
But
lot of what they are
like
about, is
they're
this idea of
human God.
transcending like the typical human weaknesses.
Yeah, they're like their own gods almost, is what I get from that. Like,
Yeah.
that distinction between animal and human.
For humanity, they're humanists in a very literal sense of that word. Okay. Does anyone else want to say anything about the BGs, which is how I'm choosing to refer to them because it amuses me?
Yeah, well, there's a thing about what you just said about how they look at it, and they sort of have an analogy to two things. Where first of all, in universe, the Mentats also have sort of like a regimen and a way of looking at things. It's sort of a mantra they go through when they teach themselves the skills of a Mentat, which Paul also goes through that regimen. But in outside of the universe, sort of the idea of an order of highly powerful women who is waiting and fearing a male version of themselves also kind of reminds me of the Wheel of Time, right?
Yeah, well, Wheel of Time's another book I haven't read, so maybe I
Okay,
should
me
tackle
too,
that after this.
Oh, if you think this is a big mouthful, then Wheel of Time is. Something else.
That's another first novel that has sat on my bookshelf for a while and I just haven't got to. It's ironic, right? For a person who's devoted so much of her life to Song of Ice and Fire, I don't really think I'm much of a fantasy book reader. Let's talk about Paul as a hero, because I found him very hard work, sort of quite cocky, knows what he's doing, gets even cockier because he's even more superhumanly talented by the end of book one. Just classic aristocratic 15-year-old who's going to inherit the world, and it's just like, oh. Is he more likable by the end of it? Don't reveal.
That's so
details.
funny.
Does he become more likable?
He appears so little in this book. I don't know if I mean, I don't mean any offense to you, but I feel like that might be a prejudice that you have
Oh, probably
against the type, because I don't get that at all from him. He is definitely there's a juxtaposition in book one where he is very immature. He hasn't come to maturity, and I do think that it's meant to be laid on slightly thick just so that later as he matures and grows, you see that more, that transit. It's almost like Jamie is so bad in the beginning of the series that when he has his turnaround, we're rooting for that.
Maybe it's because that sort of, he's gone on this sort of Bran Stark type journey, but with his mum.
Yeah.
And all that kind of prophecy and forward seeing that Bran gets over 4 books has happened in about 4 chapters.
Yeah. But so the question should be for you, rather, you and Kat, maybe. Do you think that Paul is invincible or infallible?
I don't know, because I've only just met him in his superhuman form, but he seems pretty. The fact that he can intuit who his granddad was and basically announces himself as a messiah was pretty punchy, I felt, as a move. I don't know. Kat, what did you think is the other newbie on the call?
I do. He is kind of difficult to pin down, but what got me was at the end, when he's finally mourning Leto, and he's like, "I can mourn you now, Father." And the thing is, I think part of the reason why Dune is just so difficult to adapt into film is because of the inner monologues. And for Paul, for me at least, inner monologues actually help a lot for him because I feel like they do give at least insight into how he's feeling. And at one point he rationalizes, he thinks back to his battle training with Gurney and is like, maybe I can't, because he feels bad that he's not mourning his father, right? And he thinks back to his battle training with Gurney and is like, well, maybe it's just because I have a job to do and then I can mourn him. He's rationalizing.
I don't know. I feel like, Luke Skywalker gets a lot of shit for being really whiny. I wanted to go to Tachi Station and pick up some power converters. But when you're 15-year-old and you're a boy or a girl, you are pretty whiny. That's what being, and it just felt like I wanted to see a bit more of that kind of normality from Paul.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't read enough fantasy, and maybe this is quite this kind of classic hero's quest. Preternatural power is part of it. I don't know.
I really don't think it is. It is Bina. I think this is. I think what's happening here is really different from the typical hero's journey. The way that Paul is presented. So this comes back to, first of all, I actually want to say I completely agree with Kat that it's really hard to adapt this because of the lack of interiority. I think that's very important for a lot of the characters. And that's why I'm very skeptical of any adaptation. But it's you can make it work with good enough actors, hopefully. But anyway, I think Paul connects a lot with what I was saying about the Bene Gesserit, which is this idea of people who are sort of transcending typical human concerns, and he is really presented as a kind of Ubermensch, right? Like a Zarathustra on the Mount, like someone who is beyond human. So he is not really meant to be likable, I don't think. He is meant to be someone above what we are, and we can't really sympathize with that. So we're not going to enjoy it. But
so does that mean that other
people
about him will become our protagonists that we'll empathize with? Because gods are kind of boring, right?
I don't think he will.
I would say if you're looking for a hero in the book, it's the titular character. Arrakis is the only hero, I think, really truly in this story.
Let me say too, though, that I think what makes him interesting, especially at this point in the story, is his kind of wrestling with that destiny of like being this like sort of emotional, non-thinking superhuman. Like and that was like, as you said, Kat, like he really wrestles with that when his father dies. He's like, shouldn't I be a human here? Like, isn't that what I'm supposed to do? Like that itself is really the highest point of sympathy I think you'll have for him. Honestly, like I think it's not going to get any better from here. I think I would say with respect to that, and I think that's demonstrated in the epigraphs. I think you see like what Paul is becoming, which is this even more superhuman. Like he's going to become Muad'Dib, that person who has like a million books written about him by this princess that we haven't met. Like that's where he's going, and I think the inclusion of that is what demonstrates to me that like Frank Herbert wants him to be viewed this way, as like not like a sympathetic hero, but as this sort of person who stands outside that kind of construction.
Also, there's one thing extra I want to add to that is that like we read like quite early in the books that Paul hasn't had any children running. He hasn't been playing with any children his whole life, really.
Never.
He hasn't had
Duncan
any
Idaho is his closest.
Yeah, his sword teacher has been his closest friend, who's like 20 years his senior. He just doesn't have a healthy relationship to anything. So he's have to be grown up. He's also been trained as a mentor, as we said before. Plus, he's been taught all sorts of combat ways to survive attacks. Maybe even as many Bene Gesserit has been intentionally poisoned so they could remove the poison from his body. I mean, that sort of kid, I would think it would be a bit screwed up. Also, maybe.
Okay, well, it's just going to be interesting to see how I progress. So much of my response to literature is through loving character, almost more than world building and plot. And
I think
that's why I love Song of Ice and Fire, which has all three actually. So it's kind of like that's why it's like the super book. And I'm a bit worried now proceeding with this book how I'm going to get on with it.
Well, I wouldn't worry too much, but I think that it's a fairly large departure. It's probably the biggest departure that they take in the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries for book one, which is the first 2-hour episode. If you have a chance to go and watch that, I think they portray Paul in it will give more clarity, and it's more in the way that people react to him. Some other characters' lines are given to Paul in that, and I think it can help provide a little bit more support for him in a way. I mean,
but then again, I sort of feel like for my first read, I'll read it. I'll just do the read, because if this is Frank Herbert's intention is to make him a god or a superhuman, then let me revel in that and see where it. But yeah,
I think how Paul like kind of says it himself is he, most people would think like power and everything is great, and he is a moral person. All of the Atreides are. So you would think that you'd want to root for that person to have ultimate power, but he calls it terrible purpose.
Yeah.
And it's like it's very much like the Christ story, where it's I have to go to this cross and I don't want to, and there's temptations to evade that purpose, but it's my purpose. And I think that's a parallel that is drawn on Paul for a reason, but
okay, well, let's see how it goes.
It's going somewhere else, so you'll kind of see.
I mean, what I was thinking a lot about when I was reading this, weirdly, and maybe it's just because Timothée Chalamet is playing him in the new adaptation, is he also recently starred in an adaptation of Henry IV parts 1 and 2, and Henry V, where you find a young man, right, like the similar age guy, Prince Hal. He
did a great job in that.
He did a phenomenal job. He's kind of like
it was a wonderful movie,
and then turns into an incredibly austere war leader, like throws it all off, but does struggles with that, what's expected of him. And I think there's some interesting analogies there, which kind of gives me hope a little bit actually for him being cast as Paul. But I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Okay.
Yeah, that was probably the casting that I saw that I thought was the best. in that. But
Um,
and they age him up a little bit in the miniseries too. I think he's closer to 17, turning 18 in the miniseries. And the
yeah.
actor that plays him, though, I think it's balancing on a knife point between love and hate, and
Okay.
and he struggles with that within himself as well.
Okay. So then moving on from Paul, the last topic I wanted to talk about was sort of centers of power. So you have the obvious power of the emperor, from which then derives the power of the aristocratic houses. So Atreides versus Harkonnen. But then you have also, you've got this alternate center of power, which is the Bene Gesserit. You have another center of power, which is in the guild, which I find fascinating because it is control of logistics and control of shipping, which I find fascinating, actually. If you think the climate stuff's relevant today, I feel that's very relevant, right? In a supply chain disrupted world, and how people feel hard politically to go up against China, because what happens if, she cuts off access to the Malacca Straits or whatever? I mean, it's all very interesting, and lots of historic parallels to people who created incredible power via trade. So thinking of like the Medicis and the great sort of Florentine and Venetian trading houses onto the great, the East India Company. So
Yeah, I
I
think
found that
when you
really,
said that in the chat, that was very spot on. I think East India for sure.
and then maybe also talking a bit about, what's the name of the planetologist?
Oh,
Kind,
Kinds. Yeah.
who also has like a secret code name amongst the freedmen, and is treated a little bit like a god, maybe, I don't know, or a leader of some kind. So there's different centers of power. Like at first you think it's Atreides Harkonnen, but then actually you realize it's a far more diffuse power network. And I don't know, we haven't really seen much of the guild yet, so I don't know how much you guys can say about that relative to spoilers, but I do wonder who you guys think is the dominant center of power between those differing circles. That to me is the bit of the book that I find most interesting. I'm actually not that interested in Paul and his journey. I'm far more interested. I'm carrying on and reading because I want to know more about the guild.
Yeah,
Well, then
that is a
you
really
might be
interesting
disappointed.
question. It is a really interesting question, though, Bina, and I think that's what really gets explored. Is how you see this flood coming, this giant wave called Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib. You see that it coming on the horizon. How does these different power centers react to a new power center arising, and who will end up actually leading them? Who will end up coming out on top in this struggle for supremacy of the galaxy? I think that's the question, and I cannot give you an answer, and it would be spoilers to give
Okay.
you something
But I'm
more.
reassured. I'm reassured to see you say it's a good question and that will be discussed. That is the question that we go forth with, because that to me it's far less to see Paul become Muad'Dib than to see what that does to the existing power structures.
Yeah, so you might not be getting the full answer in this book, but if you go on reading, there will be some payoff for that.
Cool. Okay. Well, that gives me
I'd
hope.
say for Dune proper, the Tome Company, the Guild, even the Bene Gesserit at large are more macro ideas, and for Dune, we're more exploring the micro power struggles on Arrakis in regard to the Fremen and the rest of the universe.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
But that will have giant consequences on the rest. So
Yeah, exactly.
whatever happens on Dune affects the whole.
Yeah, it's the finer
universe.
point, right?
Yeah, that's
Who
been made very
controls the
clear.
spice?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so those were the three things I wanted to touch on. I don't know, Kat, if you have other things, or the rest of you, if there are things in book one I haven't mentioned that you think are important that I should pay attention to, or that you find really fascinating. Any other bits and bobs?
What did you think about? I'm curious. Like, how did you respond to Duke Leto as a character?
Well, I think it's very hard. I felt a bit cut off at the knees on my response because it's made very clear very early that he's not going to survive. So it's like if you read Game of Thrones and you knew from the start that Ned was going to die, which I suppose most people do now, but I didn't. So I was really invested, and I really loved that he was good and noble and honourable. And then he died, and it was really devastating. But it was kind of like he was noble and honourable, and I loved that he loved his mistress. He seemed like a really decent guy and a really nice dad and a really good ruler. But I knew there was no point worrying about it because he wasn't going to survive long. So I guess,
Right.
Oh, and he's
which
in
is
the miniseries
devastating
played
because I
by
love
William
Oscar
Hurt,
Isaac. Yeah, I love William Hurt too.
and
So I mean, it's
and
a bit
it's even
sad.
worse because William Hurt's portrayal is so endearing. So it's definitely a crushing blow. But I feel like, what did you think about knowing in advance who the traitor is?
Yeah, I didn't particularly like that either because there's so much fun to be had in Song of Ice and Fire with people figuring out who traitors are. So I felt everything, because I'm so used to George just like dragging everything out, but in a beautiful way, in an intriguing and beautiful way, that I felt a lot of this was quite rushed. I felt quite overwhelmed, like, oh, so we already know the traitor. Oh, so there's already been an assassination attempt. I feel like there was like a book and a half's worth of Song of Ice and Fire in like a third of a book here.
Absolutely, yeah. And
Which
I
is
think
no bad
that's
thing. I mean, it's no bad
yeah.
thing as I sit
No,
with an unfinished fantasy series on my shelves, but it was a bit overwhelming because the only fantasy series I've ever really truly invested in is one that's very drawn out and patient. So, yeah.
That's the funny thing about Dune, right? It really like it at constant turns it kind of undercuts what you think the story is going to be, right? Because at the start you really do think it's going to be this power struggle between like these two feudal lords essentially, and there's going to be a lot of like moves and counter moves, and it's going to be a lot like A Song of Ice and Fire basically, and it's really not, right? And the fact that everything is foreshadowed basically, right? Like we basically know everything that's going to happen in this book from the start because they tell us in the epigraphs, they tell us basically where this is all going. So it's like, what is the intrigue? What is the uncertainty, the tension of this book? Like it's really hard to figure that out. And I think for me, it goes back to like Paul, like, will he take up the destiny or will he not? And like, what will happen when he does? What's that going
But
to
we
mean
know he
for
does,
the
right?
people?
Because we know he's being written about as Muad'Dib by this princess. So again, I just find that like less involving because there is an outcome. There has to be that outcome, right? He has to like Prince Hal become the king because otherwise, what are we all doing here?
But I think
So I was.
we know that, but we don't know like how he's like we don't know what he thinks about it or like what he like what that's
Exactly.
going to actually look like from his point of view. And I think that's kind of where the tension comes from in the book is like, is he going to take up the
It's not
terrible
so
purpose or
much.
is he going to resist it? And like,
Yeah, it's
is he
not so
going
much
to
what
alter it in some
happened.
way?
It's like why, how, and where, and when. Those are the more important themes. And I think my favorite part is the next book. It's book 2. I think that's the meat of it. And the most important things happen in the next section of this book.
Okay, well, now that we have done this podcast, I will hurry and read that, and we can reconvene and maybe have a slightly. I don't want to make it sound like I feel like I've been quite negative, but actually, I did race through it. I found it really interesting. I loved the Bene Gesserit as a slippery female-led organization. I loved Lady Jessica. The sort of the Reverend Mother or whatever she's called seemed really kick-ass. So there was lots in it that I liked. And I'm hoping for a bit of, the military sidekicks like Gurney coming more to the fore. So, and I really liked just seeing the first sandworm. I'm really looking forward to meeting some Freeman now. So I am intrigued for it. I am psyched up for it. But yeah, I just found the whole kind of aristocratic hero quest becoming a superhuman god a little bit alienating.
No, I feel you on that. Like I have a lot of hangups with this book, and I think like for me, like I have to kind of reinterpret it as the kind of stuff I was saying because like just as a straight hero, he doesn't work at all. So I have to think that like there's something else going on, and that's kind of how I rationalize it.
That's why I say it's more of a philosophy book, and it's more the ideas of morality and causality.
Yeah, which I think is very, very interesting. So I look forward to sort of, viewing it in that light. And I just, as we record this and we talk about Paul as a semi-god, demigod, maybe just as a god. I was just thinking of another VOC we did on the film by Milos Forman, Amadeus, about Mozart, when there's a scene in the film where he's just moaning to the king of Austria, effectively, that he doesn't want to write operas about Greek gods anymore because no one cares about people who shit marble. They want to have operas about their barber falling in love. I just feel like that about Paul. Like it just feels like he would shit marble. Oh, I'm so crude. I apologize.
No, you're totally right. You're totally right on.
I would even up the philosophy guide to almost a biblical book with a historical biography with first-hand commentary on. That's basically
Right.
how it reads to me as well, which isn't doesn't go if you're for the very engaging sort of character work. That's not the first book necessarily that much more that's like, oh, I'm really intrigued in how he thinks. And well, I'm looking forward to hear how you then look at it when the first wave has blown over Arrakis and we're at the end of the book.
Okay.
I'm curious what everyone else thinks about this. Like for me, I tend to gravitate toward Jessica as sort of my like main point of sympathy, and of course
Yeah.
she has some complications to who she is too, for sure, being trained as a Bene Gesserit. But like seeing it from her point of view is like kind of being scared of what Paul is becoming and kind of wanting to protect him from that. Like I that's the kind of point of view I take typically when I read this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Patrick, you hit it on the head. Like it's a very biblical in a sense. So it's almost like knowing that Christ was a real historical person and really did die. Does that spoil the Bible for you if you read it, or are you still able to take the lessons? Like whether you like believe in it or not, can you still see the lesson in it? And I feel like much of the writing is you'll go through 100 pages, 200 pages, 300 pages to get one line that'll blow your mind.
Okay, right. I think that's a good point to leave it. I don't want to suck you guys into revealing more than you should at this stage. So I really want to thank you for being the guide to me and Kat to a certain extent, although she's at least read the whole book on this journey. I really appreciate it. And I will read book 2 as fast as I can because it sounds like wild stuff is going to happen. And
I think you'll enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I did enjoy book 1 for reasons other than I thought I would, but I am looking forward to book 2. So I'll speed through. I will post my stupid comments in the Dune chats. Thank you all for answering those and tolerating them. For those of you listening at home, if you are reading Dune, come and join us on our Discord server. There is a Dune chat there, so we can discuss all things book related, and also as the film comes to our screens, we can discuss that too in other versions as well. So I hope you'll join us there. Anyway, it's been really cool, guys. Thank you so much. And
Thank
I look
you
forward
so
to
much,
chatting to you
Bina,
again.
for taking on all the heavy lifting here. I'm very grateful to you. And I'm so excited to experience it with you in particular.
Yeah. Okay.
And sorry for all the Paul apologizing. I mean, it's
that's okay. I mean, he's a hero. You should. I mean...
but yeah, everyone's just not. Well, he's actually kind of interesting if you look at him like this. It's but
he is probably the biggest maybe two ever made.
Yeah, every fanboy's explanation. No, you should really like this book because this guy is interesting when you look at it like this and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah. He's not even like the main character though for me. Like he's so secondary to so much else, I feel like. And I feel like you'll get more of that in book 2.
Cool. All right then, folks. Thank you so much for joining Dune Chat, and we'll speak soon. Bye everyone.
Bye everybody.
Bye.
Love you guys. Bye-bye.